application of that, but I do think we need to package it in a way where we can help people make those connections and systems without giving up on the science behind it, because that's part of the systems. So I think going into a business, I think that's a good place to start. As far as packaging and what Bo was saying, I think if you hit them too hard, too soon, with the hard science, you are going to lose them, but you have to scaffold it to get to that science, because ecological systems are just as important as societal systems. So I think they need to look at their own business framework and just build upon it from there. I feel that so often we're learning about frameworks and competencies, but I still feel like, okay, but how do we really get people, to make those connections? There's still some practical application question marks there.
I would love to jump the gun a little bit, because we're already hopping a little bit more into where I wanted to go later. But in the other article in which I wanted to bring up tonight, which is Oberon's article, I want to make sure I don't lose my spot here. So the teaching and learning sustainability and assessment of the curriculum content and structure of sustainability degree programs in higher education. So Oberon, Drips, and Nicholas. If you were to go to the page 12 of that, let's see. Page 12, which actually in the publication itself was page 54, but it's the 12th page of the article. In their findings, I'm just going to read some of this to you in case you didn't get that far, but they actually have findings and under the subheading of natural science. So they write, the lack of natural science core courses at the master's level is certainly disconcerting and somewhat surprising, given that previous studies found a heavy biological and ecological orientation for environmental sustainability programs with insufficient attention to human and societal aspects of sustainability. It should be noted that Sharon's selection criteria were not restricted. Okay, so we're talking about the methodology, but rather programs that address sustainability in some way, including incorporating sustainability into existing disciplines. Some of the apparent scarcity of natural sciences may be due to the fact that in some programs, the natural science components are covered within the general sustainability or applied science courses instead of standalone natural science courses. This is something that our things can't structure, but basically, therefore, it is surprising that the master's programs were not more balanced between natural and social sciences in their core subjects. It may be the case that many master's programs in sustainability evolved from departments, programs, or faculty with backgrounds in the social sciences, possibly as a counter-response to perceived exclusion or marginalization of social sciences in sustainability classes. So what they're getting at was that undergraduate courses are for sustainability and environmental blah, 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 are more natural science oriented. But then as you get into the master's programs and even doctoral programs, we've now left the natural sciences back into undergraduate. And so if someone is coming from, say, like Bo, if you're teaching undergraduates business courses, and then someone wants to take on a master's in sustainability something, they have essentially foregone all of those natural sciences. Yet now you're working with someone who's going to be walking away with a master's degree and or a doctoral degree eventually, and has been deemed proficient in sustainability, all the while not actually having been formally instructed in hard sciences beyond what was their essentially high school requirements. So, Bo, to your point of how is it that we sell sustainability and at the same time to people who essentially don't have natural science literacy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so, I think
go ahead.
My take of that after kind of reading that is, I was a controller and a vice president for a technical college in UWSP for a long time. I think that when you get to those master levels in those doctorate levels, people are trying to sell, a program and something that's useful. I think the undergraduate, I get an undergraduate to get an undergraduate, but I come back for my master's in order to make it useful for my business. Right. And I think that's why it deals more with the business type function. So
right.
That's my perception of it.
Once we get past undergraduate, we've essentially left behind the pursuit of the liberal arts dream.
Yes.
And people aren't essentially electively to pursue a master's program just to further their knowledge base. As altruistic as we want it to be, like, oh, people are pursuing their educational dreams. Yet now, once we get to the secondary and doctoral levels, this is now about more specification of a field. And for most folks, it's going to be more about career advancement. And so that's, it's people don't want to go into advanced in accounting, but let's make sure they have all of their, their biological courses resatisfied to that component, especially if they're doing an MBA focused on sustainability. That hard science is not going to be there. Like, for instance, how is it that we can make forest thinning in light of all these wildfires a more economically viable option? However, using small diameter trees, and that there takes a lot of understanding of forestry and science there, yet in a business applied. In Arizona, that's actually been a major thing with the 4-5 project, which I recommend all of you doing because it's super fascinating. Cutting the trees to save the trees, essentially. I won't go any further in that one, but in terms of working with adult learners, this idea of promoting interventions and some of the competencies that the Saldago piece pushed. Any other questions on that? Or Aaron, if you have any further thoughts, or anyone else?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Dr. Nair? This is a small question, but so I was talking to he's a urban forester.
Awesome.
And he was talking about cutting down trees to save the trees, like recycled trees, like a concept. Where was that you just mentioned?
So 4FRI, which is the Forest Restoration Initiative. So in Arizona, basically there is a massive undertaking to thin out 4 national forests: the Kaibab, Apache Sitgraves, Coconino, and Kaibab, Coconino. Anyway, and the Tonto. I think it said 4 or 5, or repeating myself. Anyway, it's those 4. So essentially, and this is what California is going through right now, is just years and years and years of fire suppression, which has allowed a lot of small diameter trees to take place over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And it's these small diameter trees which are being essentially the intermediary fuel between grasses and old growth trees. So if you were to look at like old forests, like 1890s, around the turn of the century, they're very thin. Like, they just have enormous ponderosas or Douglas firs, and essentially there's like, you could just run, like, there's pictures of like horses just like going ballistic through them because they wouldn't have to hit anything. But if you go to the forest now, it's actually a lot of undergrowth and that's because a lot of fire suppression over time. Anyway, so the economic challenges that are coming with that is that the logging companies who have been kind of hired to help thin don't care about trees that are less than 8 or 10 inches less in diameter. They're not really economically viable. So how is it that you attract logging companies to come and take trees that have never been seen as economically viable in the logging industry? And it's not like we can have the government go in and cut, because is cutting trees in a government expenditure? Is that something that the Forest Service can take on, or can we outsource that to companies? So now the question is, what can we do that's economically viable with small diameter trees? To thin the forest, to cut the trees to save the forest, essentially. But there needs to be an economic incentive. So now it's like decorative bark, or can we do small diameter poles for simple wood furniture? Like, how can lumber companies and millers get creative with essentially small diameter trees? And that's been one of the big challenges, is selling timber companies on cutting small diameter trees.
Mm-hmm.
All the while.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the university, Northern Arizona University, is the one who's been kind of like they have a world-class forestry studies program, and I did a story with them a few years ago, and they've been really leading in charge in this. But go ahead.
No, there's a study at up in Woods in partnership, I think, with UW Extension, that their big research is what to do, like at the tops of trees. And, after they take the larger diameter of the trunk, and they're trying to find uses for that. So,
right.
Sorry to ask, but
No, it's interesting, and on a sustainability front, it's a race against time because what we're seeing in California is where a lot of there are not thinning efforts. So, and I don't want to get into Trump's tweets over the weekends regarding his philosophy of how we take care of wildfires. It's very interesting. Keep your kids in science classes. But with that, let's see. We've got 6:20 now. I didn't want to get into that. I didn't really think I was going to talk about forestry on this seminar, but no, it's all good. So with that, one of the things, for instance, I was responding to some of Jessica's, one of her blogs today. It was her contribution piece regarding to the competence and competencies post, and she posted something from Rudkman, Matthias, Jasmine, and you. There's 1, 2, 3. I'm looking at the list she's got here. 4, 5, 6. She's going to go 8 competencies, and they're very generalized, which is something that you'll see across many competencies. And this is kind of the last point I want to make regarding competencies, and I want to move on to the programs. But what you'll find, and this is probably something that you've come across, is that they're very generally written, as in you probably couldn't plunk these into a teacher's hands and expect them to just run with it. They're very much intentionally left to interpretation, which is a good thing because of the diversity of which these competencies are supposed to help a wide range of educators. At the same time, most educators, particularly that in the K-12 spectrum, are so inundated with standards, set objectives, and other their general load that's already put upon them, that the actual mental processing of when a teacher were to approach, say, competency in foresighted thinking, competency in interdisciplinary work, competency in cosmopolitan perception, transcultural understanding, and cooperation, capacity for empathy, compassion, solidarity, competency in self-motivation and I'm just reading a list right now, motivating others, and competency in distance reflection on individual and cultural models. Ask that of a very stressed sophomore level teacher, and they're going to look those sound great, don't know when I'm going to get to that, and they got to move on. So one of the things that when we go about both internalizing competencies but also utilizing competencies in curriculum development and program design, how is it that we can internalize, interpret, and then put into use these competencies? So you almost kind of, I mentioned this before, but this idea of being reductionist in approach to competencies, breaking these things down a little bit so that they're very more specific and digestible in terms of their implementation. Now we're asking a lot of teachers to take that on, because one of my own criticisms of a lot of these competency lists is that you have a lot of academics who have put forth these competency lists, and they sound great, and for anyone's heart who has ever been tickled by sustainability goodness, oh yeah, totally, we should totally put these into programs. But then when it comes to a lot of the work in which our teachers often already face, these things fall by the wayside. So is it onto us, and for those who are pursuing a more applied degree such as yourselves, how is it that you can take what the literature is saying and put it into more digestible elements? And perhaps now, Aaron, getting to your point, this is where we start attributing, okay, if I want to do competency for empathy, compassion, and solidarity, now what does that look like for the environmental science teacher or the biology teacher, the physics teacher, to start taking that and crafting that in?
Right.
And then if you present that same competence to the social studies teacher or to the English teacher or to the music teacher or whoever, how is it that we start to allow the competence to drive the content design? However, I will say this, and this gets into the Oberon article, is that because of the generalization of these competencies, you're now having sustainability programs that are just running wild with them. And what's happening, and let's see, what page do they bring this up on? It's actually towards the end. I think it's page 15. Yeah, 15. wish I was able to highlight this. So basically, they were saying that one thing that has been really nice about, but also challenging, is now the generalization of these competencies has allowed for an enormous diversity for sustainability programs to emerge. However, they also argue that that might be hurting the legitimacy of our field of study. Is that when you do not have consistency from program to program to institution, as in this is the agreed upon flow of the competencies and how we go about teaching. But at the same time, that's decentralization of education. Is that what we want? That each institution is able to define sustainability that meets their institutional needs, but also the communities in which they're serving? Or do we want to have a more standardized approach to sustainability curriculum and program design, so that from UWSP to Yale to ASU to wherever, that there is consistency amongst these programs? Most other disciplines already enjoy that consistency with a nice little tinge of what the university thinks is appropriate. But right now, the infancy of sustainability as a discipline is still allowing programs to be incredibly diverse. So, but that also puts what? And that's a whole conversation, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, or the strengths or weaknesses in which that plays to. Kim, you were going to say something? Or did I miss someone else? You don't have volume, Kim, if you're talking.
Audio.
Hello?
There you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the points that I wanted to bring up.
We lost you again.
Standardizing
There we go.
sustainability education. When in fact we want to celebrate diversity in diverse programs.
Right. Kim, your audio is like totally not. You were in and then you were out.
Now she's really mad.
I know.
Really mad. Oh, we heard that.
Now we hear you. Yeah.
Oh, no, I just want to say quickly that standardizing sustainability programs seems counterintuitive.
Right.
Because we want diversity of programs and what we're learning, and diverse ideas of what students bring to the table.
I was just thinking, I'm in a program where we have accreditations. We actually have 2 accreditations, but in our accreditation process, we have like a set of standards that are still broadly defined, relatively, meaning any program can figure out how they want to meet those broadly defined standards. And, that's how it's handled in our field, is through accreditation. And so what that accreditation does is it does create a sort of a national standard of what the field deems as professional, high quality. So I don't know if sustainability has an equivalent of accreditation bodies that would perform that function.
A little bit. So ASHE does a really good job in terms of putting that across the board. And if I know ASHE actually has their conference coming up in Pittsburgh in early October. And if you haven't been to an ASHE, I encourage you to go. But they're kind of seen as, so ASHE stands for the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. And they often put together not just facilities and operations of what would meet Sustainability X in terms of a campus initiative. Like, they were really helpful in like the president's climate signatures and so forth. But they help to align curriculum, and they offer curriculum workshops quarterly in terms of helping that standardization. And then but at the same time you have the SDGs and what UNESCO's put out, and UNESCO's been pushing a lot of what is education for sustainable development in a lot of ways. So you don't have an accrediting body per se. the accreditation of these programs still kind of fall under traditional accrediting standards, and just in terms of aptitude and rigor and educational product performance. But in terms of a accrediting sustainability, not yet, because honestly, like, we're still coming out with these different definitions, these different competencies. UNESCO, I mean, the SC just came out in 2015, so it's not like an accrediting body is just going to emerge along with it. And it is this diversity that is helping. So, of course, when we get into systems theory, this idea of diversity promoting resilience, as in you have a different amount of actors that have different capacities to absorb, withstand, or deteriorate amongst environmental disturbances. Perhaps if we have a sustainability program that perishes, and there have been programs, entire universities and colleges that have perished, smaller level arts that have focused more on, say, sustainability entities or sustainability practices, who just were not financially solvent. At the same time, do you better craft these sustainability curriculums programs to meet the needs of the communities in which they serve? So it's funny because I think about oftentimes the four major courses of study that are compulsive in compulsive education. You think your math, your social studies, your science, and your English. So the hope is that you would think that everybody in the United States, at least, has the same level of math and English language proficiency. You would think, right? Or at least that would be the goal, in which everyone can do the same amount of math and the same amount of English, and that would just be some altruistic dream that we all live to see one day. And then perhaps the social studies and the sciences are a bit more locally controlled, because those are potentially more geographically dynamic. As in, what are the local histories, the local cultures, the local customs, that if we're learning in California, perhaps don't need to be taught in Boston. Same thing with, like, in Arizona, do we put more emphasis on geology and mining sciences, since that's what's kind of more an economically viable product here? And we do more marine sciences, say, up in New England, where some of those more industries or cultural traditions are prevalent. And I'm not saying that we should or should not, but that might be some of the idea that helps foster some of the diversity in terms of sustainability. When it comes to mining in Arizona, do we focus more sustainability on, say, earth sciences in terms of geology? So then that's just part of the social efficacy demand of what is the point? Or do we prepare our learners to be across the board change agent? And what makes an across the board sustainability change agent? And that could be up to constant debate. And so with that's where I'm curious about what you all thought about this idea of where do we put our emphasis. So this is where I'll be turning things over to you all. But a little bit of talking points now that we have 11 participants, so we're mostly all on board, I believe. I wanted you to each take about 2 or 3 minutes and talk about where should we put our effort when it comes to developing standalone programs in developing these change agents and furthering sustainability competencies, or do we do more effort on doing it across disciplines, across programs, as opposed to let's invest all of our time and energy in creating the sustainability program. Do we invest that same time, energy, and money into injecting a bunch of sustainability stuff into the engineering program, injecting a bunch of sustainability stuff into the history program, into life sciences, into social and the business? I'm curious about where you all fall in that idea, because that's something that a lot of programs are grappling with, a lot of universities are grappling with. Where do we spend this time and attention? What do you think is going to be the most appropriate? And I don't know if you all saw, but I kind of blew that up to be this week's blog prompt. So whatever you already written and whatever you walk away from this conversation, I hope it just kind of adds to your blog prompt. I don't want you to just compose something entirely different. Just add to what this is. So with that, I'm going to be keeping tabs. Everyone wants to contribute. But are there any volunteers in terms of like what people are thinking in that process or what they've observed already?
I'll go first with Lynn. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so my background comes from social sciences and higher education. So if I were to think really about what's necessary as a cultural shift or a shift in culture to lend more towards sustainability, I think that it needs to be interwoven into higher education as a whole. So across the board in all the coursework. So I currently teach ethics, as you know, and social sciences, and we talk about sustainability. We talk about social sustainability. I don't have a background in environmentalism, so I certainly can't speak to that. But I think if we're going to shift culture as a whole, if we have standalone programs, it's only going to touch, unless it's within the community, it's only going to touch the people who take those standalone programs. So that's my 2 cents. I think it was under 3 minutes, right?
Very much so. No, but it's good, and I think that kind of speaks to Aaron's point before. You being an individual coming from the more of a social background, and it's that when we think about sustainability competence, do we still acknowledge the fact that this is an all hands on deck discipline, and that not everyone is going to be versed in the natural sciences? Although ultimately we all understand, and this is why we focus so much on systems thinking, that it is the natural systems in which we all depend upon. Right. But for our purposes, our discipline is not actually in the business of those natural systems in and of themselves. We are more in the business of the human capacity that manipulates those natural systems. And is it then that we need to have a complete foundational understanding on, say, the carbon cycle, phosphorus cycle, those things, or ecosystem services and so forth? Or is it to the fact that we need to be able to deploy those individual change agents that, say, have a more holistic, more cultural competence, and know how to deploy them in such a way that their actions will have known and perhaps unknown positive effects on natural systems? I think about working with communities in South Phoenix, which has been traditionally our population of underserved, minority, and poverty-stricken neighborhoods, and those are the neighborhoods that are closest to a lot of our industrial sites. And so how is it that maybe providing more intentional, thoughtful, culturally relevant services for those communities, especially educational neighborhoods, can actually help improve a lot of the industrial dissidence, if you will, in those areas? And there have been studies locally about how folks in those areas, their lifespan is anywhere between 8 to 11 years shorter than that of the people over in Scottsdale, which is all of 8 miles away. So, it's one of those things that you can think about. What is the angle which we can create here? Okay, I'm gonna stop on. I'm not gonna get on a soapbox every time after one of you speak. I promise. So, it's funny because y'all get me thinking, and I like it. All right, so Lynn, thank you. Or go ahead.
And can I just add something quick? So probably most of you don't know this, but before I taught social sciences, I taught business for 12 years. So I've been teaching for 19 years, right, across the board, corporate training, whatever. So I think that, when I speak, I'm not speaking just from the social science perspective, but I also think that, educating young people, whether it be in high school, which I don't have that background either, but really just about, as you said, about the whole systems approach to everything that we do. So the connectedness and the ecological, I don't have the science background, as I said, but in my master's, very ecologically grounded.
Sure.
So I guess that's what I'm saying. I'm not just saying in social sciences, I'm saying that across the board, teaching young people in general. So that's my soapbox.
Sure. I've seen the chat box, and Lynn, maybe. Okay. So Lynn, maybe that was yours. But yeah, if folks could just mute their speakers so that we don't have that loud noise in the background. Okay, cool. Thank you, Lynn. Anyone else? Who's next, I should say?
I can go next. Can you hear me? Can you not hear me? You can hear me. Okay. Well, I think I could sort of piggyback on your response to Lynn's, Dr. Bernier. I wrote down here Lang and Orr when they discuss the controversies with the Sustainable Development Goals. They talk about polar views, and Orr's been quoted as saying they can be complementary, and one could help the other. So, looking at the institutional setting, looking where I teach, I think that you could definitely leverage both. So, if you're looking at having a program, the program itself could be a home base for sustainability, sort of a way to have checks and balances, while you try to implement sustainability as sort of a university-wide mission as well. I don't think there's one person, there might not be one person on the planet who is the ultimate czar of not just sustainability, but every single trade that your college is putting degrees out on. And so to have a sort of a program, whether it's a master's or even an undergrad program to start, that you could refer to in terms of expertise, and say you do technology and you're like, hey, what are some concepts that we could be implementing in a correct way? Kim mentioned earlier, like greenwashing. So avoiding greenwashing by having a research hub, basically, for those sort of programs. I think that's kind of, you can, I'm the chef, so I'm going to say a food analogy. You could have your cake and eat it too, I think, in that regard. That was really my big thing. And, I would agree with the points Lynn said, but I would add in the other component too.
Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing that's really interesting is that a lot of programs, and I'm going to keep this short, a lot of really early, we're talking like mid-2000s, a lot of those emerging sustainability programs came from more of an environmental studies department, if you will, but they started tapping into essentially faculty for hire across campus. If they want to do an environmental ethics program, they'll tap into somebody from the philosophy department. Or if they wanted to do environmental engineering, they'll go over to a traditional engineering program just happen to find a faculty member who was like, yeah, sustainability is kind of cool. It's emerging. I dig it. And so you had a lot of this organic growth. So actually you had the interdisciplinary work kind of come together, if you will, to then kind of form a faculty by hire, if you will, hodgepodge of faculty from other places. And this is what happened at ASU. It's what happened at my alma mater, Ithaca College. And then all of a sudden they start to form this kind of cohesive unit. So the question is now, how is it that then they can kind of like turn back and then help all these other programs, all the while solidifying, maybe, if they offer it, a Bachelor of Science in Sustainability, whereas the theater arts student can get a couple courses in sustainability, or they might actually hear about sustainability a couple times in some of their courses. But then again, that all takes required energy and effort. Brandon, I think what you suggest is plausible. It does happen, but it takes a very concerted effort to actually make that take place. All right, who's next?
I'll be willing to go. If anyone wants. So anyways, more so than got a lot of feedback going on here, but anyway, so more so than saying what I believe one should or not, if I go back and take a look at, I really see this as a different paradigm. Most in higher education, we've always had disciplines, biology, accounting, mathematics. We haven't had, a program that's open-ended. Okay, we've never had a sustainability program that says it can be all or end all. I think what Aaron had said, one of the problems that I see is that the accreditation agencies, okay, probably won't be willing to accept that as a program unless there happens to be some type of, rigorous type of elements. Okay, so if we look at a program, it kind of needs to be, a set program, across all campuses, so that if I learn from ASU sustainability, I'm also getting what UWSP is. Okay, that's what the accreditation seeks to achieve. Okay, they try to make sure that I'm not being cheated as a student in one class and not the other. So it's really a different paradigm. And what's interesting is I see sustainability as not being in that box. I think sustainability is more that it should be open-ended. So it's kind of a catch-22 that in one way, if we identify it as a discipline, we kind of lose what sustainability is about. Okay, I don't know. I guess that's kind of my point of it. So I really think it's a different paradigm, and I see in higher education, is accreditation really going to be able to accept us not having, certain standards for that program?
I think we've. I will say this, and I think it's very interesting being on this side, on the instructor side. But you all find yourself at a very interesting time in this discipline's life, if you will. And for a long time, the last 15, 20 years, you've had a lot of theorists in whom you're developing your literature reviews around. Having kind of like openly pontificating and come up with these brilliant ideas. You've had some rogue institutions that allowed sustainability to come do its thing, saw that it gained some traction, and now you're having multitudes of programs emerge. And now this idea of the accrediting bodies being like, oh crap, this is actually a thing that people want. What are we going to do about it? How can we put it into the boxes that we've been putting all these other boxes into? And a lot of sustainability practitioners, such as yourselves and myself, and various authors, like, no, we don't want that. Yet, that's sort of the business name of the game. So, as Bo, you say, this really dramatic paradigm shift of like, is accreditation what sustainability education ultimately wants? Does it even need it? And so, with you all now entering the field, it's up to you to think about, okay, where is it that you position yourselves on that realm? Do we craft programs to satisfy the itch of accreditation or the perceived want of it, versus that of, no, let's honor this new paradigm shift that that many folks believe that sustainability is inherently demanding of education? Or do you find something that toes both of those lines, and what does that look like?
To also get on top of that, traditionally, people see standardized programs as what providing value. Okay, they see unstandardized programs as well. It's not accredited. It doesn't provide us with value. So again, it's going to have to change perceptions of people that are out there that says, I understand there's not, that rigorous type of a program. It's
Right.
kind of, it's the acceptance there.
I guess to just clarify one thing about accreditation, I guess it depends on the accrediting body, but in my experience with accreditation, it's not the same thing as standardization. So accreditation does look at quality. They want to make sure that there are certain quality standards, but how a school meets those standards is meant to be flexible and so forth. So I just make that point that standardization is not necessarily the same thing as accreditation. Meaning outcomes don't have to be the same, but quality of rigor, if you will, or maybe it's more about the culture. The culture of a field can be maybe controlled a bit more.
Well, and what Liz was saying about the higher order thinking skills and systems thinking. I mean, you can still have some of those components without having everything be the same.
Yeah.
So I kind of get what you're saying there.
Aaron, was that more of what you wanted to contribute, or is that just come more in reaction?
I was just clarifying.
Okay. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you both know, Joy and I come from the same doctoral program, and it's from a school that a lot of people haven't heard of, and it's not of the likes of major universities per se. But it's weird, like a kind of a quick line out in terms of like people asking, what it is, or even sometimes questioning the validity of my degree. It's like, well, I come from an accredited institution. I, having lived it, enjoy having lived it, and many other, and promote, if some of you actually end up, I know he's doing a cohort 2 course, but living that, very similar to what you all are going through, this cohort model of distance learning. It's rigorous as hell. It's hard to keep up with. It can be both intellectually and mentally and physically crushing at times. And yet other folks want to play the accreditation game, the name game, and the prestige, that sort of thing. So that we do have perhaps this idea of accreditation as a baseline, that we don't actually have to call into question the quality of the outcomes of the rigor in the program design. So it's one of those, I wouldn't say a necessary evil. The question is, how much do you want to design a program and the curriculum therein to meet the needs of potential accreditation, to sustain accreditation, versus that of the transformative change in which you seek that may or may not be reflected in what those quality standards are to meet accreditation. And the question is, will you put yourself in that position to do it, or is that for other people to take on? So I guess it all depends on where you find yourself in that process. It's a big old sigh. All right.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Like I sort of see accreditation as in line with or in league with any sort of policy, if you will. So the structure of government, structure of policy, whether it's governmental, municipal, and within higher ed, accreditation becomes kind of part of the governing structure in a way that nothing in our world happens unless we regulate it, right? Like we see that if things are just left unregulated, people don't necessarily follow any sort of rules other than, I don't know, maybe some cultural norms. But, right, so what keeps society in check is some sort of governing structure. And so I guess my take on it is where we're at now in society, if we want to actually have impactful change, we have to figure out we have to have compatible forms of regulation. I guess that's what it comes down to, for good or bad, right? I mean, I just feel like that's where we're at in our human history, that we need some more structure of policy. And for higher ed, accreditation becomes part of that.
Could I just make a comment, Aaron? An interesting observation. Serving on my faculty council for the last few years and being the chair of the Roles and Responsibilities Committee, one of the really bizarre sort of things that have really helped us. We don't have a union or anything to protect our teachers, but I'll tell you, accreditation coming in and NEOSC doing their every 4-year checks keeps our administration in line like nobody else would. And I mean in terms of teacher abuses and cutting corners on things. Like I've had to go to bat for people when it comes to compensation for teaching overloads, things like that. That the faculty council has the leverage of being interviewed by accreditation, which shows on the university, and that's really like their only really card in the game. So in some regards, it's also not a hindrance. It's also an enabler for faculty to get a fair shake. I'm just an odd thought there, you know what I mean? But just something I've seen in action.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, who wants to chime in?
I can go. So for me, I don't know, coming with a pre-service teacher background and kind of being a science teacher and all of that, I really have thought about you going in as a pre-service teacher, you have to take methods classes, at least one type of teaching class. How do you teach the content that you're going to teach? And I think the way that my brain has been processing how do you get sustainability to all pre-service teachers is that you do some type of, I don't know entirely what it looks like yet, but you do something in this introductory methods class. Because I think once you get the ideas and the ideals of sustainability, it's easier to recognize them. I think we've all been able to say, oh, since I've been introduced to some of these concepts, I now see them everywhere. I now am more aware of them. And so then picking and choosing those faculty who are gung-ho and ready to go, having them start to instill it in their classes. And there's some projects that I've read about, like the Piedmont Project and the Ponderosa Project, that have tried to work for their faculty into being more sustainable. Obviously, those two projects are older and aren't running anymore. But it was a push to get their whole faculty then, or some people in their faculty, moving towards more sustainability. What I also think is interesting personally is that I think it's almost more how the content is delivered than, like, yes, there are some ideals and the triple bottom line and those things in sustainability, but how we deliver that content, I think, is almost more important than what that content is. But that was a new thought that has recently come to me, so I'm just going to drop that bomb and stop talking.
No, drop away. Where was it? I'm looking back at. So I just wanted to read. I think this was the paragraph that I had pointed out. So yeah, on the last page of regular text on the Oberon article. Right before the conclusions component, so Liz just kind of speaks to it. So it says, finally, it would be useful to include an assessment of the teaching methods and approaches in the courses, particularly the interdisciplinary, applied, and research courses, to move beyond analysis of what is being taught to rather understand how it is being taught. This approach would allow an assessment of whether sustainability in higher education, at least, is including the communication and strategic skills that are important for sustainability science, as well as bridging topics from natural and social sciences, which our disciplinary categorization system cannot capture. So it is very much this idea of acknowledging that that content of what we teach is just going to be an error. And I think this is kind of where you were getting more focused on, is that of course we're going to need the natural sciences, and Lynn, getting to more of the social sciences. Of course, everyone's going to camp out where they feel comfortable content-wise. We're all going to do it, and that's cool. Like, I'm not going to be the first one to sign up for intercultural relations. I can kind of talk about it, but I'm not going to roll up and be like a cultural mediator in my community for sustainable outcomes. I'm not that dude. However, it's like, okay, I can play in the educational arena and talk about the methodology of how we should go about that. I can be that guy. And so, Liz, when you talk about the focus on methodology, and I remember going through my own teacher prep program in that time, I'm just like, what the hell does any of this have to do with the 4 years of my undergrad in environmental studies? I just had this complete cognitive dissonance of just like, what the hell am I actually doing? But I think it's what we're getting at in terms of practitioners and those who are applying it, is this, Bo, you kind of get this idea of the paradigm shift. And we go back to Meadows, if we go back to Danilo Meadows and thinking systems, when he talks about those leverage points, and the last one, the big two being paradigms, recognizing paradigms, and then transcending paradigms being the most transformative way to adjust a system, at the same time the hardest way to do so. It is perhaps our calling to then say, let's focus less on what we are teaching and more really give that critical thought to the how. And that's going to rub a lot of people just completely the wrong way, or it's going to be a complete shutdown. Even this idea of the conversation of accreditation, it's like, but that's the way we've always done it, and that's just how we measure quality. So the question is then, okay, do we need sustainability to exist in these absolute traditional formats? How much are we trying to blow up? And this is where I actually think about Salgado's piece about interventions competency. Is that like, if you are a working educator and you want to transform how it is that we teach because of what you're learning in systems thinking and sustainability, you now need to exercise intervention competence on your own capacity. There's a whole full circle thing we got going on here. It's great. So, all right, well, Liz, thank you for that. That was great. Who wants to go next?
So I want to jump off of what Liz was saying, because as I was thinking about what you were asking today, I thought about, well, you know, I was thinking about the ELA program that I work in, and then how that connected or separated from the entire program as a whole at the school that I'm at. And you know, you can't separate the ELA program from the entire general program of the school, and that's what's happening right now. And then I wrote down here too, it's really connected to what Liz was saying. I'm really into studying that whole child, because I feel like if you don't study that whole child, you don't know what to teach the child. So that goes to the curriculum and the content. And if you don't know the whole child, you don't know how to deliver, just like what you were saying. And then also, if you don't know that whole child, you don't know how to assess the student. So really, my thinking is you can't separate the standalone program from the general program. You have to think of it as a systems program. That's all.
Go ahead.
I agree with Liz. Like on the side chats, we were talking about that. Really, it's how you teach ecological thinking or systems thinking, and how you're delivering the content, if it's nonlinear versus transmissive. And so I think we really need to consider that, and see what's saying holistic learning, like what's going on with the child, and interpersonal skills with the students in class, and how they're collaborating, like a cohort model. So you're teaching sustainability by teaching or facilitating how to make connections. So I think the methodology is really important in the application.
Thank you, C and Kim. I want to go next.
I can go. Can you guys see me?
Hey, Mike.
I'm not sure. I wasn't sure if my internet was going to work tonight with this. So I was kind of thinking about with my project, kind of tying in like a sustainability program, but then it ties into a system as a whole. So, for example, at my school, we have a career pathways program, which is the students can go on a pathway like technology, or they can do like tech ed. But I was kind of thinking if I could revamp my earth science classes that I teach and integrate sustainability into that, but then the students would take like a political science with one of our teachers that's big on sustainability, and maybe an economics class, and they could do like a certificate pathway program. And at the very end of all these programs, the students do some sort of like action work where they actually take action. We get to that level 7 of Bloom's, and they actually get to do something to make a difference and change the community, not just the school, but maybe transform the community themselves. So it becomes part of the environment of the school and the community, not just, it's something we just threw in there. So that's kind of where I'm at right now on it. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere, but we already have these career pathways in place, just nothing for environmental or sustainability. The courses are already there, and they all have a little bit of sustainability already. So we kind of hopefully a natural transition to just kind of link them together a little bit more. Did you guys hear any of that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Wasn't sure.
And even your mention of career pathways, in the sense that to have that idea as a career pathway, that's a paradigm in which you're working within.
Right.
As in, a fundamental reason why this class exists is for the sake of aligning you to a potential career path. And in doing so, that's now going to have major ramifications to the way in which you design the instruction, to the content in which you include and exclude. And also then you have your administrators that have now bought into that paradigm of career pathways. And so you have to play within the parameters of what they've set forth for not just your class, but the other classes to have that consistency. And so, you can start really blowing up your course design if you've now been inspired as an individual instructor, and if you have that autonomy, which is awesome, to start designing the course and the program to take on more sustainability concepts. But at some point, are your administrators and those whom your position is beholden to, let alone the students, are you still scratching that itch of career pathway readiness, if you will?
Yeah, and I'm really lucky where I'm at. They specifically hired me to try to bring more of this to the school.
Awesome.
So they're really open to my ideas and stuff, and trying to. And they knew when they hired me, I have a biology background, but I have an environmental background. So I already was kind of an odd person out there, because they would have hired 2 people for my job. But because I have the biological and the physical sciences, they end up getting 1 person. So I'm already reaching across several disciplines. And they asked me to revamp the earth science anyways. So I've already made a lot of changes, kind of baby steps, towards what I want to propose to them next. But, it could take 5 years to get something like this approved.
Yeah, the program I had was only given 4 years time, and the change to make a program over time didn't scratch their itch fast enough in terms of the CTE program, and they canceled it. So, if you have enough people who have brought you on because of your unique skill set and attentiveness to, sometimes I think about like a baseball manager who's given 2 or 3 years to transform a losing baseball team to a World Series baseball team, and everyone's ticked they don't turn it around in time. It's like the reason why Meadows puts these paradigm shifts at the end is because they're so insanely intensive, resource-wise, time-wise, to pull off. And yet, even though sometimes we view education, particularly public education, is just monolithic, glaciers move faster than change in public ed. For some reason, sometimes we have these really oddly non-realistic means of actually getting these programs off the ground. And typically they often are put on the shoulders of 1 or 2 people, such as yourself. So good luck.
Yeah, thanks.
Who's next?
It's just an idea.
Yeah.
Nothing else. I'm revamping my earth science classes regardless. I've already started doing that, and I have total backing of administration for that.
Cool. Just an aside, I keep folks, I see folk the side conversation, and I don't, I'm trying to listen and watch you all. I don't know if that's something, if there's questions in there to me that I'm missing, or is that just an aside that you all are doing and I should just not pay attention to? But every time I glance over, I'm like, oh, that's a rad thought. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I want to speak to that. And then I'm like, maybe that's where y'all exist and I don't belong there. But I just want to make sure that the conversations I want, and questions I want to focus on, I'm just trying to be more present in the audio, but if there's something on the side that is there, bring it up to me. Otherwise, I'm not going to divert my brain into both text and audio and visual. Okay, with that, we've got a few more folks who joined late, like Jessica and Vic, if you guys want to hop on, or anyone else who is around, by all means.
Vic said that he's trying to talk and he can't talk right now. His microphone isn't working. That's something that's happening in the sidebar right now.
All right.
Trying to talk.
I see that now.
So I think I'm jump in if that's okay while Vic's trying to get his audio up and working.
Sure.
If that's all right. So forgive me for being late. I have had a crazy busy day that started at 4:30 this morning when I drove over to Sheboygan. I have spent the entire day in meetings with my president and then had to rush back for a Booster Club meeting tonight with my cross-country team. So I am exhausted, and I'm going to actually kind of connect this to what I did today with some of the meetings that I was in. So I had kind of this unique experience today, and most of the meetings that I spent were both with our administration and our deans, but then also with some representatives of some local companies in the Sheboygan area. So we were with Sargento, we were with the Kohler Company, with Rockwell Automation. And it's really interesting because our traditional program at Lakeland is really moving towards being an experiential learning and launched this last year a cooperative education program. And so they're trying to connect with these companies to find out, you know, now that we've been working together, what are the students that they're working with missing? And it really led to this very dynamic conversation about they're coming in with the technical skills, they're coming in with what they learn, but they're missing kind of these other guts that they're needing for their companies. So they're missing these global competencies, they're missing these social justice components and pieces. And so it really led to this conversation of how do we need to kind of expand what we're teaching just on the technical skills side of things, but start looking more at what I would consider sustainability issues, because they're coming into play on a social component, but then, you know, just environmental sides. You know, they were saying, Laura Kohler from the Kohler Company was saying that they actually have students who are recent graduates coming to them saying, okay, tell us how, you know, what's your company's views on climate change? How do you practice sustainability issues within your company? And so somewhere they're getting this, but because they're working with our students very early on in the process, we need to be helping our students get there. So it was just kind of this very unique conversation that I really wasn't expecting for it to turn into today. But to bring this all back to kind of what we're talking about, which is we started talking about how do we infuse this through our whole campus community. So not just curriculum based, but we started talking about resources that we can use for programmatic things through our student development office, talking about leadership organizations, development and training. And so really looking at it, and I think this ties back to what Kim and C were saying on approaching this from a very holistic lens, especially when you have a residential campus where students are living, you know, and doing all of their daily activities, not just going to class, but how do you infuse these things throughout everything you have on the campus, you know, from class to residence halls to athletics and all of those things. So I don't have a good answer for that, for any of it yet, but I think that really key to this is I don't think one class is the direction we need to go. I don't think that that's serving the needs that we're hearing from our employers for what they need from their graduates. So that's all. It was a long, exhausting day with lots of conversations about big ideas, and I'm tired.
Right. You know, it's definitely the allowance of knowing that, and that's the thing. This is the beautiful thing about residential campuses is that when class ends, you can actually still kind of corral a student into potential programs that are not, say, academically binding in a way, but still envelop a student in a learning experience. And, you know, and that's for, you know, for us, I mean, I think it's interesting how we've talked so much about the specific program orientation of either a student who's only there for a campus 8 hours a day or for 8 months out of the year. And how is it that when we design these programs that they are, you know, looking at what the boundaries are, if it is just, say, direct instruction and that's all we got, or how can a campus as a whole design programs that are much more encompassing so that a student can participate in, say, waste reclamation across campus as a whole. And that's not necessarily binding to their degree of choice in the academic program, but then you have an immersive cultural residential program that scratches those same itches as well. So if we have to exclude X standards or outcomes in the academic component, can those then exist, if you will, on a residential engagement plan? And that could then be construed as a holistic learning program across campus. So, and I think, and a lot of you have really gotten to that, especially in your blog. A lot of the blogs I've read so far have spoken to this idea of, I read the hands, head, heart quite a bit. The holistic has come up quite a bit. And so, maybe we're never going to be able to get, jump beyond the bounds of the day, the time which we have in a classroom, assuming we have a classroom, or which the duration of however many years a student has in a particular program, or just a semester. So maybe it is on us as program designers to be much more savvy, with what exists in terms of the time and attention of our students outside of the actually assigned time in which we're supposed to have them. And that might be just where we have to play. And that, again, this is where I think ASHE does a fantastic job of supporting practitioners, even though they focus on higher education. I've seen a lot more K-12 instructors go that route. But they do a phenomenal job of supporting sustainability officers on campus, or sustainability inclusion agents, if you will. And not many straight up faculty per se, but really anybody who is a sustainability bent on a campus. And it's a fantastic exchange of those learning opportunities. So they're happening. It's good. So thank you, Jessica, for including that. Appreciate it. Who's next? So I know Vic is essentially a bystander, technologically speaking, to all this. But I think... Okay.
I think Vic is trying to call in.
Vic, I see you are writing, I am here. Okay. All right. Well, Vic is a robot. Maybe he's a Russian troll. I don't know. So, of all the places where they could have hacked into. So, okay. So with that, it's 7:18. We're, if we can get Vic in, awesome. But in terms of the Oberon article in of itself, in the prompt in which I had for this conversation, I really wanted you guys to focus on the findings. And, when I've read some of what I thought was super fascinating, this idea of how a lot of programs are early on bent towards the natural sciences. Let's see, one person waiting in the lobby. I have a couple of Vics now. But did anyone take anything away from the Oberon article that they thought was super interesting, or, surprising for that matter? Do you find it all surprising that there is such a discrepancy between the nature of the core courses between undergraduate programs and master's programs? Do you think it's appropriate that, for instance, at the early we had more of a science bent and then more of, say, a social bent for the master's program?
I think when I was looking at it, and I wrote this in my notes, it still seemed very separated and siloed. So I think that was the one thing that I noticed that a lot of sustainability programs out there, you have natural science and you have a social science class, and I think that really gets to the heart of how you're teaching and learning. Because then whatever job you have, you're going to be constantly thinking of those connections.
Sure.
So that was the one thing that struck me.
Hello?
Oh, Vic!
Hey.
There's a Vic.
Am I here now, or
You are here.
Oh my God!
Yay!
So I was using this here, and you didn't see me at all,
No,
and you didn't hear anything I said.
no, I'm sure it was all brilliant too.
Yeah, great. You are so sweet. So just what I was trying to say is, your question about maximizing sustainability competence.
Sure.
I like the sort of this all-encompassing view of the first article. What's his name? Salgado.
Mm-hmm.
And how he...
She, actually.
She?
Yeah, Paquita is her
right?
nickname. It's fun. She's cool.
Oh, Francisca.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, intervention competence. I don't know enough about it, but what I'm getting from it is that it is sort of all-encompassing. It's not that it's a way of pouring down all the coursework and how the coursework at a university level, 2-year level. I'm not going to talk about secondary, but I think that the question you asked is that it could be a combination of probably energy focused in two ways. That I don't know if I like the idea of standardization in sustainability. I don't think that that's where it's at, because that goes sort of against the idea of what sustainability education is all about. Are you hearing me okay? Okay. So depending on where higher education goes is really another question. And I think if sustainability or educational sustainability is sort of this future pathway that we are all sort of hoping for, that I don't know if it's going to be 2-year, 4-year master's pathways. So let's say it continues as 2-4 master's doctorate. You could have the specialization that would happen through the 2-year approach. 4-year would be infused within the curriculum. And I'm not saying this is hard and fast, but there's all these endpoints. The endpoint in a 2-year school might be becoming a solar installer, for example. In a 4-year program, it's going to be more broad-based. It could be education, So the endpoint is going to be different, and those could have overarching themes. And so those overarching, for lack of a better term, I'm just using a high school secondary term, but there might be these sort of within the realm of sustainability, here are the overarching themes. It may be different for a solar installer. It may be different for a 4-year educator, but there are, the way you get there is going to be different. And that's why I don't think that Prescott University and Northland College should be the same in what they offer, because it doesn't happen that way right now. If I'm a U.S. history major, it's going to be different pathways at UWSP compared to Prescott, compared to the University of Washington. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at. I think that the energy needs to go sort of in these two pathways that we were kind of focusing on. And I think I lost your audio.
No, I just enjoyed.
Or no one's saying anything.
No, I was saying right, and shaking my head. I realized I was muted the entire time. But not but, your peers on the side here are showering you with compliments, and rightfully so. I think one of
is that on a chat or something?
You know what? You got the video working. Let's just be good with that. So, but Vic, this observation that you have regarding, some of what we talked about before, this idea of the paradigm, is how much can sustainability really be like, you know what, this is what we're trying to do, and to conform ourselves to what has been regarded as the academic norm may actually end up shooting ourselves in the foot.
Exactly. I think it will.
And
that's just my own feeling. Just all the reading says that it would.
Right, and especially when you get into critical theory.
Exactly.
And when I first started, I'll tell you this, Delia Cruz-Williams was my committee member. She's out of Portland State University, and I never even heard the word critical theory or critical pedagogy, and I was halfway through my program. She was the first external committee member that I solicited, and she's like, well, what about this about critical theory or critical pedagogy? I'm like, what? And she said, you need to absolutely stop everything you're doing and now take the next 3 weeks and read everything you possibly can. And I just remember feeling like my heart being crushed because, oh God, I'm supposed to spend the holidays with my family. Now I have a committee member who's telling me I need to bring 20 books home with me. But it was probably the most important component of my actual literature learning, was looking at the call of these folks in critical pedagogy, and just saying we cannot expect to achieve the change in which we seek at all through the structures in which we've been operating. And and I've been trying to have, it's interesting because I have this like pragmatic little being inside of me that says, the 11 of you are going to be the first cohort that has to play within the bounds of the jobs in which you're occupying, be it K-12, be it university, be it administrator, and so it's like, how can we give you the tools and the dispositions and your own competence to realize this change, at the same time still satisfying the needs in which just providing your paychecks. And yet, how is it that you can almost subversively or overtly start to enact this change that sustainability is inherently calling for? I mean, a lot of you have signed up for this program because you inherently felt the mismatch of the structures in which you're expected to teach and operate within versus what the heck all this sustainability or the systemic problems in which we're facing.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. Excuse me. It's okay for the field, the emerging field, to go through this pain because it's sort of this pain of understanding the way it's been and maybe I'm not saying totally letting go of it, but there is this letting go process that will allow all of this other conversation to emerge. And if you think about it, a lot of the work has already been questioned. I noticed the dates on some of these articles, and then the references within the articles, look at where they go.
Right.
And to just plug it into this well-known pathway of education, the 2-4 master's pathway of higher education in North America, I don't think it would serve the field well at all. It would be lost in the mix.
I'm going to say this, which would probably peeve off a lot of my older peers in this field, that a lot of the people in which you'll be quoting in your literature reviews have achieved tenure by criticizing a lot of archaic educational structures.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they also benefit off of the way in which it's been structured.
Yeah.
And like, so what is interesting in it itself is that the very conversations in which we're having right now are meant to upend the structural significance that has allowed a lot of our, if you think about the giants on the shoulders we stand, or I just slaughtered that, but
it's okay. That's another thing. Cliches are what we're trying to let go of too.
It is true. But you have these folks that are making the call for that that transformative change, and like you said, the pieces in which I've assigned to you, the pieces in which you've been assigned elsewhere, and the very readings and citations which are embedded within those articles, all have been calling for this for decades now. And now the question is, and are we now reaching a critical mass where now accrediting agencies are saying, what the hell do we do with these sustainability programs? Where now we have yet another program, this program, that is crafting and about to unleash a number of sustainability education practitioners who are going to continue rattling the cage. So the question is, do we keep playing a little bit to the structures in which got us to this point, versus what are the best mechanisms to shift the paradigm so that we don't have, to what disruption are we comfortable with? And getting back into Saldago's piece about these intervention competencies and how we go about those transitions and interventions, versus that of the people who are like, I'm sick of this, we just need to blow it all up. What do we do? And like, I'm not going to tell you to do one or the other, or to accelerate in which any other way. Hence why I've always enjoyed the idea of spectrums. It is up to you to put that little slider on the spectrum wherever you want it to be. Because each of you are going to assign yourself to a different category of content and practice, methodology, and so forth. Some of you are going to be much more radical. Some of you are much more pragmatic. Some of you are going to play within the rules. Some of you are going to blow up the sandbox. Y'all are going to go in different directions. And so
it all works.
And and Kim, you at the beginning of the conversation, your insistence on the preservation of what makes this field diverse is key, because at the end of the day, even though we have these generalizations of competencies, when you really break them down, it's how people take them and run with them is what's going to dictate our own coming of age and being a change agent.
Intervention competencies.
And intervention competencies is going to be one of those things of like, how do we go about the institutions and the programs, the administrators in which we work within, be like, hey, I want to change you, I want to change this, I want to change us, at the while still satisfying the things that they're fearful of, if it's accreditation, if it's insurance, if it's liability, whatever. Yet still starting to work into the pathway of the change in which sustainability is inherently calling for. So, and this is
this critical mass that you were speaking of is it's graphable. Yeah, you can show this. If that's something that would be helpful, that could easily be done.
Right. And that's part of what the Oberon article I wanted to get at, was to show you guys how many programs have emerged in that time. And that's just a very short smattering. I mean, there's just, it's like, for instance, the membership of ASHE, which I've been telling you all about, has been growing substantially. And you'd think it would plateau at some point, but you just find more and more smaller institutions coming out of the woodwork, and probably more importantly, larger universities who are having diverse amounts of programs emerging within their one institution, which I think is really cool. And that's getting into more of the interdisciplinary and cross-program structure of sustainability inclusion. I mean, ASU, there's a dozen and a half, 24 programs that have emerged in the last 5 years that have somehow carved a niche, if you will, somewhere under the sustainability umbrella. Like our Center for Biodiversity Outcomes is one. Our Center for not biophilia. Wow, it all escaped me. There's a lot of them. Promise me.
I think what Brandon is working on within his school is another. That's going to be a niche that is going to be awesome.
Right. And so, and we're past 7:30 now, and there was this, where did it go? I'm looking at let's see. I want to read this one part here. So this is in some of the disparity between program curricula and literature on sustainability. And so a little further down, they write that we are not, this is in the Oberon article, I think I said already, we are not suggesting that sustainability degrees should converge on a specific precise curriculum. So getting away from that idea of complete standardization across the board. Rather, we suggest that intentionally designing the content of sustainability education using fundamental disciplinary building blocks from the natural and social sciences and arts and humanities would help ensure the diversity of the field while promoting coherence.
Cool.
And I like that idea of coherence.
Mm-hmm.
That, like, you know what? We all know what we're signing up for, and we can all speak the language of sustainability. Yeah, I know that me coming from Prescott and folks coming from Northland, who are both part of the Eco League, which includes the College of the Atlantic, Antioch, I believe. So you have that partnership of coherence. Like, hey, this is our message, but we're all going to do it our own way. And it's going to be cool. I'm going to keep going. So we believe that some shared foundations between programs are necessary for sustainability to develop into a mature scientific program that is recognizable across universities and understood by academics, employers, and civil society. Further, the development, redevelopment, and continuation of programs in sustainability form an important part of its institutionalization as an academic field because, to a certain extent, what counts in society as legitimate knowledge within the field is defined by the curricular content of the programs in that field. So, let's see. Do I want to?
I think that's what Bo was saying.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, we argue that education programs in sustainability would benefit from somewhat increased alignment and a more closely shared vision following the literature on the scholarly practice of sustainability. However, we recognize that some may be critical of the idea of narrowly prescribed field, preferring that sustainability continues to be an open to diversity and adapted to specific contexts. So a middle ground would be programs to explicitly articulate what their vision of sustainability is, to engage in valuable debate and discussion about the content and motivation of sustainability education. So basically, how is it that we can ensure that lively, healthy debate, constantly reinvigorating programs, essentially applying resiliency, adaptation, and evolution to our sustainability program designs, are always present?
Yeah.
And like,
what page were you on?
So on the actual PDF itself, it's the latter part of page 56, but like it's pretty much page 14 of the document. So, I mean, I like that idea of coherence, and this is why I've always been thinking about myself. What makes healthy adaptive systems is promoting diversity and resiliency within it. And how can we ensure that our programs are designed to do the same? I'm very parched, which tells me I've been talking way too much. So it's past our time. Although I always kind of figured this will be kind of a buffer thing. So is there a thought that someone just needs to get out right now?
I just had one thought. Kind of brings me back to what my first question was, this idea of hard science. And maybe I didn't mean hard science, but maybe there's an intermediate area of knowledge that's between having an expertise in some core field or discipline. It could be in the sciences, it could be in anything. And then the soft skills of being able to, communicate, work with people, and so forth. But maybe there's a middle ground of core sustainability content that is that bridge. And I think we're hitting on it in terms of systems thinking, and that sense of cohesion across all systems, whether it's social systems, biological systems, or whatnot. So I feel like we're getting at like a content core that is particular to sustainability that, I don't know, can serve as a base.
And this is why, I think I did catch Liz at some point in the chat box. You said, systems thinking was relatively new to you in coming into this. And at no point has anyone really been like, you got to know systems thinking in order to do this. Like, systems thinking, which has often been kind of thought as the fourth wave of sustainability, and you can look that up on your own leisure if you want. But really, I think a lot of people are starting to get this idea of like, you know what, we kind of need to, I wouldn't say leave the physical sciences and content sciences, which is vastly informed really the environmental bent that sustainability has often taken on. But really, if we are to truly achieve learning and education for sustainability, we actually kind of need to let go of the content and grapple on to something that is actually very much rooted in physical sciences, which is this idea of systems. Because we see systems emerge in the social capacity. We see systems emerge in economics. We see systems emerge in the environmental sciences. Because honestly, it's all patterns. It's patterns. When you let cycles do their thing, you'll let patterns emerge, and then you can read the beat of the system. And that's something that we can all get behind. That is a very inherently innate human characteristic to observe and recognize patterns. It's how music rolls, you jive to patterns. That's how language rolls, you jive to patterns.
That's environmental literacy.
It's environmental literacy. You look at seasons. If you were to look at traditional ecological knowledge and what you look at in indigenous groups, and how westernized science has blown through a lot of that, but when you look at how indigenous tribes and peoples have worked with the lands for generations and generations, seasons to seasons, and what they've done is they've just essentially just taken the pulse of the land through the allowing of cycles to continue. And so when you think about sustainability and human intervention being essentially this disruption of these patterns and these behaviors and what's causing everything to go amok, but it is an innate human capacity to read systems and to look at the behaviors, to health and well-being, and what preserves these behaviors to persist, whether they're good or bad. And so this is why I really enjoyed like what you guys have had experience with Fritjof Capra already before this. This is why I pushed on Ella Meadows. Peter Senge is someone I would really encourage you all to look at as well. I think hopefully you've heard of some of these things. His book, especially like The Fifth Discipline, coming from an organizational capacity. And getting also into complexity of science, but I don't want to push you in that regard just quite yet. But I the literature is moving in this direction, and I believe it's very well founded. And so I don't need all of you to become really well versed in ecosystem services. I want you all to become better versed in what systems is, and I don't need you to all become proficient in systems science just yet. But a baseline understanding of systems dynamics and just how is it that and I'm happy to go into this. Maybe that's something I need to instill in a future iteration of this course. But you all are kind of getting at it, and it's cool to see that itself become the emergence. So this is our last seminar, and I wanted to say, one, thank you for all of your inputs, your participations. I was reading Jessica's blog last, and there was one where she, this idea of the knowledge in which you're all coming into this course. And I know I made presumptions on what folks had in terms of what is curriculum, what is sustainability, what is systems thinking, all this stuff. And I was presented with a wide diversity of folks who came in not just being versed or not versed, but to the different directions in which they took said capacity. And so if there's anything I can just say out loud to all of you, is that as you go about designing curriculum and designing programs, the question is how flexible and fluid is the nature of these designs that you are coming up with. because you don't know who's going to enter your classroom. You don't know who's going to enter your program. You're not on the selection committee sometimes, and so you're going to receive learners who have tons of different lived experiences, and especially with something as wide and diverse as sustainability, you're going to be taking tons of different directions, be it environmental, social, economic, whatever, let alone anything on the educational spectrum. So I'm going to be giving as much feedback as I can, and I hope the papers are going well for you. This being the first iteration of this course it's fun. I mean, that's kind of the thing is, guys, this stuff is fun. It's going to be a challenge. But the fact that this is innovation in education right here, like you're living it, it's cool to be a part of it. And you all are just, you all are giving me your best. I've been floored by the work so far, and I'm just very appreciative of all that you've done. You all are juggling families and travel and technological glitches. Mike, I'm really sorry your kid threw your phone in the pool. It sucks. But, I do want to say thank you for being willing guinea pigs, for signing up for a brand new program that, you're the first ones. That's a lot of bravery. So thank you all for doing all the best you can. It's all you can ever expect anybody who's willing to take on a new program to ever do. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone.
And with that, as our program comes to a conclusion at the end of next week, and then grades will be rolling in the week or two after that, I hope that Joy decides to keep me kicking around in whatever capacity. All of your success is essentially a reflection on how we've done as instructors and how well we've crafted this program. So if there, of course, is any way beyond this course that I can be of help, assistance, whether throwing you some cool references or serving as a mentor, whatever, I'll do the best I can, as I hope you always do for your students and your coworkers. So never hesitate to ask, and especially as you start going about soliciting potential committee members, like your emerging peers. So don't hold back. Get out there. Ask people what's up. It's cool. I mean, it's insane when someone whose article you read and you're just floored by, and they're like, "Yeah, I'll be your committee member." You're like, "What?" So it's a really cool thing, especially when you start going to conferences, especially when, man, I told the story about eating pizza next to Steven Sterling. It's just like, this is just a weird thing, and the field is still small enough and emerging in itself that these cool interactions take place. So full throttle on this.
Dr. Bernier, can I ask a personal favor?
Here we go.
Could you are you able to send me some of your work? I like to read some of your work.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's all open right now. My dissertation is on ProQuest. You can literally just type in, I think, Andrew Bernier or ProQuest, and my diss will come up. And then I have a piece on education sciences, which is really a very abridged version of my dissertation. And I'm waiting for the Journal of Sustainability Ed to publish a piece of mine. I've just been in a holding pattern. If you want to actually see what's a slowly crumbling website I put in of my program, you can go to crestsustainability.net. That was the career page in which I developed my program. But links are broken, and some Google Docs that were embedded probably don't work anymore, but whatever lives in there, you're welcome to check out. But anyway.
Can you put the webpage in the chat?
Sure. My computer just told me I am at 5% battery, so